So for my last video, we went over exactly what the tiling and offset does and what our UV map is all about, and kind of went into details on that. So today we're going to kind of expand on that and kind of highlight what's going on with a very common tactic when doing shaders. And we're kind of going to make a shader that's going to have an image that kind of dissolves away as it moves away from a point. So what we're going to do is I have a shader here. I just made a brand new one, dissolving shader. I have a material, dissolving shader material here, and it is assigned to just our flat plane. So we can kind of see the results of that in our scene. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a node. And I'm going to create a UV node. And if you watched my last video, we talked a lot about what the UV map does. And a UV node is just taking the actual UV of the mesh that we're working with and simply uses that as a source. So why would you want to do this? And what is this color map all about? Because that's kind of weird and confusing. Why is it green, red, and yellow, and black? Well, if we think of the UVs, remember the UV is actually an array, right? There's one UV point that maps to each point of my mesh. And if we took the actual X and Z coordinate of that, remember if we look at our scene, right here, Z is right, I'm looking at the top, Z is positive, Z is up, and positive X I believe is right to left. So if we think of using the X as red and Z as green, the lower left hand corner is 0, 0, and if we interpreted that as red and green, it would be black. As we move this direction in the X's get bigger, so the red gets more pronounced, right? This would be like X equals 1, so red is full color red. And the Y, or in this case the Z, since we work in the Z direction, Y is up, right? That if we interpret the Z as green, it starts at 0, and as we go in this direction, the green gets higher values until it's full green. And here it is both X and Z is 1, and so red and green light make yellow. There is no blue because blue would be the Y direction, which would be up. And all of our shaders work on planes which are just two-dimensional, really. So that's the deal with these colors. And that's important to understand because what would happen is if we just took the output of this UV, interpreting the X and Z values of my UV map and interpreted them as the red and green, save this asset, and if we go to our scene, we'll see that it simply duplicated our map, right? So I guess in this direction, the Z is getting bigger in this direction from where our camera is. The X is getting bigger in this direction. So that's important to understand because we're going to utilize this in many, many different ways throughout our shader. All right, so what we're going to do is we're not going to take this output directly, but what we're going to do is we're going to split it. So we use this split node. See, it's channel split. So I'm going to take the 4 colors that come in. Again, the 4 is RGB and then an alpha channel, which we haven't kind of talked about yet. And if we feed the R into our base color, so what's going on here? So if we save this asset and we go to our scene, what we see is it's white over here and it goes to black. So what is happening is the color needs both an R, G, and B. And it's using this one value, the R value, which of course goes from, bright to black. And it's using that for all the RGB. So it's just going to be black and white. Because, of course, when the RGBs are the same, it's going to be some shade of gray. If they're all RGB are all full value, say 255, 255, 255, if we're talking the normal full color palette, then it's going to be white. If they're all 0, it's black. And if they're all 192, then it's going to be some shade of gray. So it's going to go from colors here to just shades of gray. And if I use the G, let's drag that in here. Let's save that. It's going to be white on the bottom and black as it goes up, right? Because these are the bigger values. So that's step 1. Understanding what this UV is, interpreting the UV position as an actual color, a red or a green. So step 1, what we have is we have an output. We don't even have an image or anything. We're simply using the UV map as the colors. So why would we want to do that? All right, so we have our little, it's basically a color ramp, right? It goes smoothly from white to black. All right, so what happens if we add, let's create another node called noise. What if we take just a simple noise node? Let's set this to like 20. And then what if we take this node and if we drag this to the output, what's it going to look like? Save that. So basically what we have is so noise goes between 0 and 1. It's a random number. And remember that the UV, see this UV, it's multiplying this UV by the noise value. So of course, 0 times anything is 0. 1 times anything is itself. And so essentially what we're getting is if we took the UV position, right, multiplied it by some random number between 0 and 1, fed that output, again, remember this just outputs one number into the colors. It's going to be an image that's all shades of gray at some random pattern, right? So that's what we have. All right, so we know that this provides a color ramp, right? This provides a noise. What if we added those two together? So 0 plus anything is just 0 or of itself. 1 is going to make it bigger, so this would add to it. Remember, our color ramp goes from, if we use the G, from white to black. So at the top it's black, so the color ramp is adding nothing to our image. This is adding just random pixels to our image. So let's create a node here. Let's call it add. So we're going to add these two together. So we're going to take the G because we want that ramp bright on the bottom. Remember, it's flipped over when we look at our image. Brighter on the bottom, white 0 on the top. And now feed that into our output. And what do we have? Let's see. Save. Scene. So now what we have is we have something that's bright on the bottom and it gets darker as it goes up. Right? All right. So let's go into here. So now what happens if instead of this UV, so this is just the default UV. Remember on our on the last video we showed how you can offset, right? We talked about tiling and offset. So we're going to create another node, a UV node. So you'll see this is going to be used a lot. And we are going to create a tiling and offset node. right? So we're going to feed the output of this UV into here. Actually, we probably didn't even need, we might not have needed that. We'll see. All right. Sometimes it takes a little playing around with this. All right, so let's add a time node. All right, feed the time. We want to only offset it in the Y direction because we're going to want to kind of go move bottom to top. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a vector 2 node, because if I fed this time into this, it's going to offset both the X and the Y, because it really needs 2 values. And if I only feed it 1 value, the time, it's just going to use that same value for both. But I only want the Y. So I made this vector 2 node, so the X is going to be 0. It will never offset the X. And then I'm going to feed this into here. So what it's going to be doing is over time, it is going to be offsetting. And remember from my last video, it's just going to shift all of the UVs over time, and then it wraps around. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this UV instead of this UV. So now we have something interesting. We have this random noise value that is moving. Again, here it's going top to bottom, but in our image it's going to go bottom to top. So let's save this. Let's go to our scene. And now what we have is, remember we had our this bright bottom here because of our ramp, and it's going from bottom to top. So it looks like, could almost be like smoke rising, right? So you could see this if you wanted to have maybe smoke moving across your image for your effect. This would be the start of that. But it's still quite not what we want. All right, so let's figure out what we can do to make this look a little bit better. Let's see, do we even need this? No, let's just delete this guy and just take the UV, because really we weren't doing anything with that UV. This UV is the same as that, so we really didn't need that. Do our scene, yep, looks the same. All right, so we have our noise and we're adding it to that, and then we're outputting it. So you'll notice it looks quite a bit brighter here because we're applying our light to that in our scene. We could brighten it up if we want to multiply the output, but we're not going to do that right now. What we're going to want is, I really want this to kind of dissolve away. I don't want there to be, I don't want the white to get all the way to the top. So what can I do to make that happen? So we noticed that when we were doing this before, using this UV and splitting this, we can kind of get a color ramp. All right, so let's move this out of the way so we can get some space. All right. So what if we make a UV node here? This is why it's important to understand what this is doing. Another UV node. All right, let's split this. All right, but now if we split this, it's just the color ramp is just going to go in the same direction, and it's just going to be all the brighter, right? And that's not what we want. We want it to dissolve away. We want to get rid of these white pixels up here. So what we want is we want to reverse the direction of our ramp. So our ramp is darker at the top and goes to 0 at the bottom. And what we can do is we can do this 1 minus node. So now if we take this G, we'll notice that our ramp is going in the opposite direction. You'll notice that it's the amount of black is fairly small here. We could modify this if we wanted to through some other math equations, but we're not going to do that for now. And a lot of these you can play around with various adjustments as far as multiplying things to make it brighter, dividing things to make it darker. But in this case, what we're going to do is we are going to take the output of this add node. Let's move this over here. And what we're going to do is we are going to multiply. So what's going to happen when we multiply? Well, anything multiplied by 0 is 0, right? Anything multiplied by 1 is 1. And so if we take the output of this, so right down here it's 1 and up here it's 0. Here, these are 1s and these are going toward 0. So if we take and we multiply those two together, let's see what we get. Let's see if it's what we want. Not 100% sure that this will work. All right. Let's see. Is that what we wanted? I have to take a look at this for a minute. All right. I kind of figured out what I did wrong. And what I really wanted to do is I wanted to subtract this. So you can imagine if this is, well, 1, the color can't get less than 0, right? A negative color number doesn't make sense. It means nothing. So anything below 0 is just going to be 0. And basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to take away from this color whatever value that's coming out of this 1 minus node, which is my reverse color matte ramp. So what I'm doing is I'm taking away the colors only at the top and getting less and less takeaway as it goes down, which gives me kind of the effect I want, which I want it kind of dissolving to 0, to nothing. If we look at our scene, that's exactly what we're getting here, is we're getting our colors kind of going to 0. All right. So what we found here is we're using the UV map, interpreting as a color, in this case the green color, to get a ramp. So as we go up in value of our UV indexes, it is getting closer to 1. And so we get that color ramp. We subtract it off another color ramp. We take a tiling and offset, so with the UV in, and we're feeding that into the UV, multiplying it by a simple noise. So if we change this value, let's change it to something smaller. What we get is we get a different look, right? And it depends on what you're going for. If you're going for smoke, you know, that looks pretty good, kind of like smoke. Well, what happens now if we want to? We don't want it just black and white. We want to add some color to it. So what could we do? What we could do for that? So what we could do is, there's a couple options. We could create a node. Let's create a color node. Just basic color, right? And we certainly could expose this to our shader and let whoever's using the shader control this. Remember, we can create our variables over here and expose those like I showed in my last video. Right now we're just gonna make a hard-coded one for now. And all right, let's move this over, make a little bit of room. So we don't want just solid weather. We want to combine this color, right, with our RGB, which is going kind of randomly from 1 to 0 across this ramp. So here's where we want to use the multiply node. and we're going to feed this in with one value. Get rid of that guy. Going to multiply this times this, because remember, 1 times the color is just going to be the color. As the color goes to shades of gray, it will go somewhere between 0 and 1, and at 0 it's going to be 0. So now what we've done is we've essentially colored, save this, we've colored our output, right? So what we have is we can make our resulting shader, and again you can just expose this color so they can make it any color. And so now what we have is we kind of have this effect that we can use that's going from bright to dark. And we could reverse directions from that, you know, by manipulating that 1 minus. We can, you know, go left to right or right to left. If we used, remember, if we use the, instead of using the green, we could use the red, and that's going to go left to right or right to left, depending on what we want to do. So I hope this explains kind of how to use UVs as the actual source of our color, using our offset, which we learned about the last video, to actually move our UVs and multiplying it by noise, and then combining it with another ramp by subtracting it in order to make it kind of disappear to nothing. Now we could combine it with some images and get some other effects, but I will save that for the next video, and we'll talk about how we can build on this to have some different inputs and to achieve some different looks. But it's important that you understand this whole idea of UVs, what it's all about, and how UVs can become colors. So hope you enjoyed this video, and I will now work on the next one to maybe build on this and add some more interesting effects to our shader.